thanks for checking us out. Thanks for coming back in. It's great to see you guys, and I'm happy to be here to help kind of explain some stuff, and hopefully it helps out in your life. So, my name's Trent Mahler. I'm an LCSW, a licensed clinical social worker. So, I'm a licensed clinical therapist that does a lot of different work. I'm going to get further into that in the future and really kind of break down where I'm at, what the mission is, all that kind of stuff. But I really want to just jump into things and give you guys some stuff just to start. So, we'll get closer to that stuff as we get deeper. Right now, though, we're just going to keep on chugging away with what we've been doing and building up on that. So, stick around and we'll get deeper into that and I'll let you guys know when that's coming. And, just something to throw out there for you guys is a lot of the information is going to be in the show notes, whether it be links to things, resources I talked about, all these kind of different things. I'll put little bullet points, things just to kind of help act as reminders so you guys don't have to come back through and listen to these things in full if you want to find something real quick. If there's anything I can add in the show notes, just let me know and I'll throw those things in there too and we'll keep adding to everything. So the mission of all this is really to help increase people's ability to just live a happy, healthy life in a lot of different ways, to find success, optimize who they are, optimize their performance, all of these different things. Life is super hard at the end of the day, and there's not a whole lot of, idea of what to do about certain difficult situations that sometimes we just deal with it however feels best. And sometimes that works great, and sometimes it doesn't. So my goal is to really put a bunch of things out there for everybody so we can kind of find that success that we're looking for without having to run into repeated failures or issues that other people have ran into before. We want to make life easier, not harder. Sometimes we just got to focus on what has worked and what does work, and then we can go from there and really find some success we didn't think we would find. So all of these things are recorded as well, video recorded. So these are going to be posted YouTube, everywhere else like that. So if you want to take a look at this stuff and get more than just the audio, feel free to check in, subscribe, all this kind of good stuff. We'll get deeper into all that too, but just wanted to put that out there for everybody to be aware of. And today we're going to jump into some stuff about trauma. And I know trauma is a very loaded topic. There's a lot of ideas about it. There's a lot of opinions about it. There's a lot of thoughts on it, and that's totally fine. My goal at the end of our episode today is to leave you guys with a little bit of understanding of what it is, how it works, and why we need to be aware of it, along with what we can do about it. I know that's a lot. It's a hefty goal, and we're going to try and get to everything. Some of the stuff I'm sure you guys may want me to go into more deeper, and that's totally fine. I can do that stuff. We can get deeper into certain areas of this stuff because we're going over some broad topics right now, at least to start. So again, let me know what I can get deeper into, what I can explain more of, what you would like more information on. I'm more than willing to put that stuff out there, but insight from you guys is going to help me more than anything else. At the end of the day, this is not a replacement for therapy. It's not a replacement for getting what you need. This is purely just educational to help people understand what they're dealing with, what they're going through, and just maybe what they may need to help get through this stuff. So I'm going to go over a lot of different things about what this stuff is, but I'm also going to go over some things you guys can do to seek out whatever you want for yourself. And if you guys have questions or not sure where to go, let me know. I'm here to help point you guys into a direction that might help you out. I'm even here to help just do some of the things for you if I can. So let me know what I can do. Let me know where you're at, what you're struggling with, what you might need help with, and I can help out or at least point you in a direction that could help out. And that's the goal of all this stuff, is just to help the people out with what we got going on, because life is a lot. So if you're going to reach out with anything, any questions, any thoughts, any insights, anything like that, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can always reach out through all the various social media channels. I have my Instagram, which is premier_performance_Reno. I got the Facebook and the LinkedIn page, Premier Performance LLC, for both of those. I have emails that you can reach out to, such as tmailer@premierperformancereno.com, and my last name is spelled Mahler. Or you could just text or call me at 775-561-0056. I'm just trying to make myself as available as I can be for any questions. If you guys want to send things in anonymously, that's totally fine. It doesn't bother me. My goal is just to get you guys what you need. So don't be afraid to ask for it. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there a little bit. I know it's scary, but all I want to do is just try to help out. So don't be afraid to reach out. If you have any insight of what I could do to make the podcast better, or just what topics you'd like to hear covered, or even some questions you want to hear answered on the podcast, I can absolutely get into that too. So throw any of those our way. We'll go through those, and we love to stay up to date with what's going on and what everyone's feeling about this stuff, and we'll keep going from there. So to get started, we're going to do that little, mindfulness technique. We're going to do a different one every single episode just to give you guys different things. We covered a couple the last two, so we're going to cover a different one on this one, and hopefully it helps out. This one's a little more focused on trauma because that's what we're talking about. I'm always going to try and have this, kind of brain teaser piece to start, be connected to what we're talking about at least a little bit. Sometimes we can only do what we can do. So this one is called Calm Place. And the whole idea of Calm Place is it's kind of one of those visualization exercises to mentalization based technique. And the idea is having a place in your mind you can go to where everything feels fine, where everything feels all right. I know it sounds silly sometimes, and I know for some people it works great, and for other people it's kind of hard to get into. So it's, again, just trying things out, seeing what works for you, and just being open to it. They've shown it in research all day long. You don't need to be bought in that it's going to work. You just have to be open to the idea it could work, and then just trying it out and seeing what you can get from it. So the idea of Calm Place is picking something out, whatever you want it to be, where it feels like everything's at peace, everything's okay. And this can be a place where if we're in the middle of a really stressful day, or we're getting overwhelmed, or we're having a tough moment, we can close our eyes, imagine that place, be in that place, and feel like everything else just shuts off and turns off for a little bit. I know we all need a break at times. And it can look like whatever you want. I've had some clients explain that their calm place is sitting feeling like all of their problems on earth and they don't have to deal with anything. You could be sitting at the bottom of the ocean and nothing can get to you. You're just down there and everything's muffled and quiet. It could be sitting out on a beach, sitting in a forest, whatever you want. It could be your own room. It's just finding a place in your mind you can go to where everything just feels at peace and calm. The best way to do it is to focus on those senses, what you hear, what you see, what you smell. That can kind of transport us to these places, and we'll get deeper into that in terms of triggers too, because it kind of works on both sides. But keeping that in mind can really feel like we're there, help us get that relaxation and feel our body just kind of decompress and relax, because it can be a lot sometimes. So keep that in mind. Try and think of a place that you guys could use for this. You don't have to do it all the time, but maybe try working it out a little bit, see if it does work. The first time doing it, it's going to feel a little weird, but the more you let yourself get into it, the more it's going to start to work too. So take a minute or two, write down some things that you could use. You could put it in your phone, you can put it on a piece of paper, whatever you want. But just kind of write down a little bit about what that calm place looks like, what it would be, why you want that place, and then whenever you're stressed out next, try and give it a shot. Try and sit somewhere a little relaxing where you're not going to be disrupted for a second. Let yourself close your eyes and let yourself just be at that calm place and just let it soak over you. See how it feels. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys get a lot of help from that and really enjoy it, let me know. If you hate it and you never want me to talk about something like that again, that's fine. Let me know. Again, I just like knowing what works and what doesn't, and it's going to work differently for everybody. So give me a little insight of what's working for you guys, and try it out a little bit. See what you get. All right, so let's jump into trauma now. Okay? So at the end of the day, trauma is a lot of different things, and people talk about trauma all the time. When we're talking about trauma, it's not so much about things happening to us. Those things are traumatic. When we're talking about trauma, what we're talking about is what happens inside of us. That's when the trauma really starts to take effect. And you can see this in various aspects of life, movies, TV shows, even people in our life, even situations in our life, where one situation may totally mess up one person, while for another person, they're totally fine doing their thing like normal. And it's not so much that the traumatic event was different, it's just how it hit that person was different. And that's based on a whole lot of different factors. How we are at that moment, like how vulnerable we are, how open we are to the situation that's going on, how willing we are to face this thing or embrace this thing, or how much control we have in the situation. There's a lot of different factors that go into it. Essentially, there's a couple factors to keep an eye on that tend to show us a higher likelihood of traumatization. One of those is control, like I mentioned. Having some sense of control. If you're feeling completely stuck, trapped, not able to do anything, there is a higher likelihood of being traumatized just based on how our body reacts to these things. And when I say traumatized, what I'm saying is really the nervous system in the body is being impacted by something that's happening, and it's almost on the for it happening again, which is why you get this like hypervigilance and all this kind of stuff. And we're going to come into these things in a lot of different angles because there's a lot to cover in this podcast. So with that, another factor to keep in mind is being believed. if something terrible happened to us and nobody believes it, it does impact us as well. It does show a higher likelihood of being traumatized. So again, having a trusted support that we can go to about these things and open up about this stuff and just have someone understand or hear us out can help. It can be effective. And if we don't get that, it can cause issues too. So that's something to keep in mind. That's something to look out for. The danger level can be different, and there's a lot of different things that go into that as well. There's a lot of research on this. So if you guys really want to get super deep in what trauma is and what is considered trauma, there are some things you can look at. I just want to do a quick overview of this stuff. And I don't want you guys getting too caught up with asking yourself if this counts as trauma. What you really got to pay attention to is how is it impacting your body. If you are having a reaction to it, there may be something there. It's just figuring out what that reaction is. There are a lot of different things that come into this stuff, such as triggers. Triggers are going to remind us of these things. We have our nervous system reacting to what's going on, and triggers remind us of it happening again, and it kind of teleports us back. Feels like we're going through it again. So that's why you hear all these different things about triggers nowadays, because it's really triggering that trauma to reactivate, feel like it's happening again. And that's truly how it feels. They've done experiments where they take people that have gotten into traumatic car crashes and come straight to the hospital. They scan their brain, saw how it lit up, see which areas were activated and how it was working. And they also brought people that have been traumatized 30 years ago into the hospital to scan their brains, see what was lighting up when they asked them to think about that trauma again. And it showed that both sets of brains would light up exactly the same. Whether it happened just now or whether it happened 30 years ago, it's going to hit us the same way if we haven't gotten a chance to fully process it, because it's still this alive memory. It's still this traumatic memory. We want to process it to turn it just into a memory from our past that doesn't get loaded up with all of the emotion. So with triggers, there are a lot of things to look out for. It's again those five senses. Those are those pieces that our body's looking out for. That's where it's collecting information from. The one that tends to be the strongest with trauma tends to be smell. Smells can really bring people back to situations. Other triggers in other senses can definitely bring us back. It can still happen, but smell tends to be the strongest one. That's something to keep in mind as well if you want to just bring out some nostalgia for yourself too. Having a smell that reminds you of something from the past can really transport you back, whether it's positive or negative. So being aware of these triggers is good, but we also got to be aware that a lot of the world isn't going to be aware of our triggers most of the time. That can be complicated because we're kind of like looking out for mines as we're walking through life, and we don't really know where they always are. Because sometimes we're not aware of triggers. We have things kind of loaded into our brain or loaded into that nervous system looking out for this stuff that we may not be consciously aware of. Like if we have some terrible event that happened from somebody in like a blue shirt, then anytime you may see somebody with a blue shirt, it might start spiking up all these threat responses because our body's reacting to the idea that this thing may happen again. And that's the whole idea of these triggers. It's our body just trying to protect ourselves. It just so happens that it causes a lot more problems than it actually helps most of the time. So that's why we want to process this stuff. That's why we want to get this stuff gone so it doesn't hit us the same way. And even when we got stuff out there like trigger warnings, they've actually shown that it's not super helpful. Because with a trigger warning, it still puts it in our mind that this thing that reminds us of this terrible thing we went through is coming. So it gives us this anticipatory anxiety, which starts creating that threat response by itself. And, it's all out of good intention. The idea of if we can let people know this thing is coming, they can prepare for it, except it just doesn't really work that great that way. The best way to deal with this stuff is really building up skills and tolerance to be able to handle it when they do show up, not so much trying to avoid any reminder of what we have gone through. That creates more problems. And at the end of the day, when we avoid the stuff, we tell our brain that was too big, that was too hard for me to handle. So every time we avoid these things, we actually fuel that fear, which is why the best thing to do is to face these things. And we got some therapies out there that really just do that the whole time, like exposure therapy. But that's not the only way to do it. So we want to face things, but we want to do it the right way, and we want to have the right tools to be able to face it when we need to face it. There are a lot of things that can cause some intense feelings. It can be, grief. It can be car crashes. It could be losing a job. It could be, losing a friendship. It could be seeing something terrible on the news. It could be breaking your favorite thing. It's a lot of stuff. It could be kind of anything. It again goes back to how is our body reacting to it. That's the key. Not so much what happened to us. And that's where I see a lot of clients struggle is they tend to beat themselves up about the trauma because they say the thing that was traumatic wasn't traumatic enough or shouldn't count as a trauma. And it's not so much about what happened, and it's not that game of comparison. I mean, comparison at the end of the day is the thief of joy. We can't get stuck on that. So we got to be able to look at the hardest thing that happened to us is the hardest thing that happened to us. And if something hit us, if something's causing us to struggle, that's all that matters. And that's when we got to get to work. That's when we got to start doing something. It's not asking ourselves, was it bad enough or did someone else go through this and they were fine? It's, did it hit me? And if it did, now I got to get to work. Just like if you get injured. You know, you might be doing an exercise that people do all the time. Maybe you do all the time and you're totally fine. And then one day you pull something or something gets hurt. It doesn't mean the exercise is bad. Doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you because you couldn't handle that exercise at that time. It's just the, lining up of all these factors at that moment, muscle tightness, whatever it is, led to that injury occurring. And that's the same thing with this stuff. This is why we want to really build up our vulnerabilities. We want to do that self-care. Give us the armor so we can handle things. It gives us less of a likelihood to go through this stuff. And then when these things do happen, we want to process it and deal with it as quick as we can, because if we hold it back, if we hold it in, it starts to build up, it starts to solidify, and it becomes harder to get out. People that have trauma 30 years ago versus 3 days ago, the 30 years ago is going to take a whole lot more time to get out because it's kind of interwoven throughout their lives. 3 days ago, it's a whole lot easier to get out and get gone because it's not as implanted yet. So the quicker the better when things happen. But when we're in the middle of stuff, we also got to survive. We got to get through the thing too. So sometimes it's learning to turn it off as we go through it. And then once we get out of it, then we got to turn it back on and feel it and go through the things and process it with other people. It's hard to process it all by ourselves unless you're really good at it and you have the experience. So keep these things in mind, and we'll get into it in a lot of different ways. This is important because, it hits on pretty much every aspect of our life. I see people in my life and, the lives that I work with clients and the work that I do in the community all of the time. There's so many different responses and behaviors that come just from trauma responses. And most of the time, people aren't even aware of it. Like, I point these things out to clients constantly, and they don't even know they're doing it. This is why I want to put this stuff out here. This is why I'm doing these episodes. It's because I want you guys to understand what's going on and why we're doing it, so you guys get control of your life back. You don't have to kind of sleepwalk through life as your nervous system is kind of controlling you and leading you based on the fear of something that happened to you before. Then we lose, control of our life. That's what I want to do with this. I want to give this control back to you guys. So keep it in mind. Try and be open to the idea of it. I know the idea of trauma in general, you tend to get pretty big reactions on one side or the other, whether it's like, oh, I've never been traumatized, it's nothing, or, oh yeah, everything's been traumatizing, it's been a lot, I can't get through anything, and I just kind of shut down. It's not always, but there's a lot of those extremes that pop up in this stuff because, trauma work involves a lot of emotions, and emotions, when they're held back and they're intense, they can get to the extremes pretty fast. I'm sure you guys have felt that in just moments of just feeling totally overwhelmed. And at the end of the day, that's what trauma does. It overwhelms us. So there are three really main types of trauma that can come up. We got acute trauma, which is like a single event. It could be like a car crash. It could be, like a natural disaster. It could be something happening, getting fired, a breakup, that kind of thing. You got chronic, which is multiple prolonged exposures. So that could be, like war or multiple car accidents or multiple breakups, whatever it might be, multiple times being cheated on. You're just kind of going through the same trauma over and over and over again. So it starts to be that chronic kind of piece that just builds up on you. The other side, or the third one, is complex, which is multiple different traumas happening over a lifetime. So it could be, sexual abuse, physical abuse, car crashes, natural disasters. It could be everything all at once. It could just be a couple of those. It could be kind of mixed in a lot of different ways. And it doesn't make any of these things better or worse or more severe or more intense. An acute trauma can be just as intense as a complex trauma. It's just, it changes the process of what we do. If it's an acute trauma, you're working through one event. If it's complex, you're going to be working through a lot of different things, and they can kind of intermingle with each other and cause some things to get a little more stuck than other things. So it really helps us understand where we're at in the process in terms of working through these these things and what we may need and what we may not to get through it all at the end of the day too. It impacts our bodies in a lot of different ways. And I don't know if we fully realize how much it can impact our bodies, because a lot of times people focus on this stuff being just in the mind, but it's not. Being overwhelmed regularly and living in survival mode shuts down a lot of things like eating and sleep and focusing and learning and connecting with others and reaching out for support and being vulnerable, all of this stuff. And a lot of these things help us feel better in our life. So having these things shut down or turned off or not having access to them and being in that overwhelmed state where we just get reactive and we're just living our life, second by second, can cause more and more problems, and it starts creating more and more issues. They've even shown trauma to impact brain development, especially if it happens in childhood. They've shown this through a lot of different aspects. There is children with post-traumatic stress that they have shown variations in the volume and surface area of the insula. And the insula is the brain, a part of the brain deep in the cerebral cortex that is crucial for self-awareness, reactions, and sensory information, which is big if you think about the idea of triggers, the idea of being aware of where you're at, what you're doing, reflecting on ourselves in terms of just how we react, being super impulsive. They've shown this, and they've shown this with other areas of the brain as well. But, you know, when we're going through this trauma, it does cause impact on stuff. We don't grow as well. Things don't happen as good. We're not in that setup to grow in the way that we want to grow. And again, this goes back to that idea of optimizing performance. We got to get these blocks out of the way so things can flow freely, so we can grow to be the best versions of ourselves. And sometimes we don't realize that we are actually holding ourselves back by not focusing on the fears because they're scary. And they're terrifying, they're intense. And we don't want to look at them. And I get it. And I wish we could just ignore them and have them go away. If that was the answer, I'd tell you guys. I'm not trying to tell you guys to do stuff just to do stuff. I'm telling you because this is what works and this is how it goes. And if we avoid these things, they get stuck longer and they just keep mucking up our life. We want to get to them and face them, and the sooner the better, especially if we have children that go through things. We want to do this stuff so when their brain is developing as they're growing, that they get these really crucial things they need in their lives, because it can impact a lot of things too. We're going to talk about how it impacts different things in our life as we keep going with this stuff. But one of those ways to look at this stuff is through ACEs, which stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And they've found a lot of research around these ACEs on how it impacts us. They kind of tally up how many different adverse childhood experiences we have, and based on those amounts, they can find different things that they show from it. Like one of them that kind of shocked me when I was learning about this is that the higher the number of ACEs, the more likelihood of you wearing glasses, right? And you can get really deep into the science of why that is and what's going on with all this stuff, but some of it just goes back to the fact that if our body's under stress, things don't work as well. Things don't develop as they need to. And it changes what we do too. If we go through trauma, there's a chance that we are more likely to isolate. We're more likely to stay maybe inside by ourselves. Maybe then we're doing a lot more reading, a lot more kind of close eye type things. And that can cause issues to our eyes as well. I mean, there's a lot of different factors that come into this stuff. I mean, you can talk about trauma for literally like years if you want to. There's a lot of stuff in this because we've been researching it for a while, and it causes some really big impact for people. They've even shown this to impact the immune system. If you're going through trauma or you're being triggered by trauma, you have a higher likelihood of getting sick. You have a higher likelihood of things going wrong, things not functioning the way they need to function. There's even connections to autoimmune issues, all these kind of things, because of the way the body is managing this stuff, managing stress, the stress of the physical along with the stress of the mental. So we got to be aware of this, and we got to try and catch these things early. And the quicker we get these things out, the less disruption it causes in our life. And there are things to do to get this stuff out. It impacts the nervous system a lot. That's where a lot of this stuff comes to. That's where all of the senses are coming in, the sensory information, what we're feeling, what's going on, all that kind of stuff. So that's a big part of this as well. And there are some techniques that focus on that nervous system to try this stuff to keep on moving, to keep on going in our life. There's a whole set of science based on the idea of how all of this stuff comes together. It's called psychoneuroimmunology. So it's focusing on the psychology that influences the neurology, the setup of the brain, which then in turn influences the immunology, how the immune system and everything inside of it is working. All of these things are connected, and they're doing more and more research into that field too to really show a lot of different things and what they're learning in that. And it's helping us move forward again and not have so many disruptions in our life, to feel more free and feel like there's nothing holding us back. When we go through trauma, it has this tendency to create shame. Shame is very different from guilt in a lot of different ways, but the main way is how we take it on. Shame is the idea of us being the problem. We did the thing wrong. It's a focus on the person. Guilt, on the other hand, is focused on the action, the thing, what we did. I feel bad for what I did, or, maybe I am the bad person. When we take that shame on, when it's more encompassing of us as a person, it hits us much harder. Because if I say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, then we can work on it. We can fix it. We can do something different. But if I say, I'm sorry, I'm a mistake, that hits so much harder, and it changes up where our brain goes to in terms of problem solving. Because if I'm saying I'm the mistake, it's not just like, how do I fix this problem or not do this thing again? It's how do I get myself out of the situation so I don't cause more problems? That's where it goes back to isolating. That's when we get to avoidance. That's where sometimes it comes off as anger, and we maybe break up with people, or we tell them to leave us alone, or we try and kick people out, whatever it is, because we're pushing them away out of that fear. I mean, you see a lot of that in the movie Good Will Hunting, if anyone has checked that out. It's somebody that has that response. They're taking on that shame, and they're trying to push away anyone that gets close because they're worried they're going to cause more problems and they're the problem. We got to shift that shame to guilt, and that takes a little bit of work. And sometimes we need to do that with other people. Sometimes we can do that on our own just by understanding that this is what our body's doing. So keep an eye out for that, and this stuff is correlated with a lot of stuff. So we can get deeper into that research. There's someone you can look into if you are interested in this stuff. Her name's Brene Brown. You may have heard of her before. She has a lot of different things. She has some pretty big TED Talks. She has her own TV show. She has her own books. She has some good stuff out there, and she's a shame researcher. So this is really her wheelhouse. This is what she focuses on. And if you feel like this stuff is going on, feel free to look into it, because she goes a lot into how you can get out of this kind of shame spiral we get stuck in, and how to give us that freedom of just living our life and not being held back by, these traumas that we go through. There are impacts from the trauma that can change our desires in life too. They've shown with child abuse that it actually shows a reduced oxytocin levels later in life. And for those of you who aren't aware of what oxytocin really does, oxytocin is that binding chemical. It really connects us. It creates love. It creates connection, relationships. This is why we do the skin-to-skin contact with newborn babies when they're first born, to have that oxytocin release and start to build that bond with the parents. So if that's going to be reduced, if we have child abuse and then we have those levels reduced going further in life, that's going to make that child less likely to have connections, less likely to have friendships, build relationships, to trust others, to have, healthy professional relationships with people, all these kind of things. It just starts creating more and more problems. This is why we got to look out for this. And this is also where it connects on the other side to childhood trauma can make people like morphine more. A lot of these drugs give us that oxytocin release that we did not get from developing because of the trauma before that block got in the way. That can lead to certain addictions. There is a doctor out there that talks a lot about this. His name is Dr. Garber Mate, about how, childhood trauma can lead to addictions later in life, because we're trying to cover this void. We're trying to fix this void externally by putting this piece into our body. And it feels like that, and as he says, this long, loving hug that we've always wanted. This is sometimes the pull that keeps people stuck in these spots, is they're trying to take care of this need. They just don't know how to do it, and this is a thing that's literally giving it to them, but they have to keep seeking it out, because it's not continuous. It's just kind of a one-time thing. So it starts to create this idea of like kind of chasing the dragon, chasing that first high. So that is something to keep in mind. That is a piece that does impact a lot of people, and this is why we got to be aware of this stuff, and we want to get to it early. If we get to this stuff early, it doesn't lead to all these problems later in life, where it starts to become more complex trauma, because we're going through so many different things as we are trying to seek out this just feeling of love and connection. Adult risk for obesity, chronic pain, migraines, and mental disorders increase in proportion to the number and types of traumas experienced in childhood. They've shown this in research over and over again. The more adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs again, you go through, the more likelihood you're going to deal with more problems. Life is going to be harder. And it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't mean like you're just destined for this. But if we don't deal with it, this is where it goes. This is why we have to deal with it. This is why we have to face these things. Leaving these things in the background untouched cause more problems. They start to create infections. We need to get them pulled out. We need to get them gone. It's kind of like cleaning out a wound. It doesn't feel good, but it leads to things healing better later. That's why we got to do it. It's not fun, but it's worth it in the long run. I always have a saying I like to say to my clients: easy now, hard later, hard now, easy later. Do the hard stuff now. Face it, get it done, rip that band-aid off, and it will be easy later. You will be thanking yourself that you did it. And this saying goes with everything in life. We got to face these hard things when they pop up. It's just going to make life easier for us later. We oftentimes try and push things off and try and seek out that easiness now, and it just leads us down this path where things are just harder and more draining and just kind of more tense for longer. So keep that in mind, and keep that in mind as you're going through things in your guys' life. Another part of the body that is impacted by trauma is the learning specific changes in the neuronal network activity. Basically, kind of focusing on the dorsal part of the medial prefrontal cortex. And that's kind of up front here where it's focusing on like thinking through things, logic, problem solving. So again, we're much more reactive, much more impulsive, where we're just kind of jumping to things in a lot of different ways. And they've done some pretty big studies looking at a lot of different people. They did a study over like a 75-year period looking at 8,000 or 826,000 people, and individuals exposed to a direct ACE, to a direct adverse childhood experience, whether physical, sexual, emotional, neglect, anything like that, had a 45% more likely to report chronic pain in adulthood compared to those not exposed. Okay? So what this is saying is if you had one situation, one childhood experience that was adverse, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, neglect, these kind of things, it gave you almost a 50% higher chance of having chronic pain. And a lot of chronic pain is dealt with through psychological intervention, because sometimes you can't just fix it because something is kind of like injured in the body. Sometimes it's what the body is doing. You get these inflammation responses, the stress responses, all these kind of things. The other thing to keep in mind is you even have a heightened chance of developing PTSD if you happen to be neurodivergent. They have shown this just due to that, kind of heightened sensitivity that can happen with neurodivergence with different senses, different sensations. Hearing things can be overwhelming, certain smells, textures, tastes, this kind of stuff. So that also goes with the trauma too, is there also is this heightened sensitivity with trauma for it to impact us a little bit more. So keeping that in mind. So again, this impacts our body in a lot of different ways. We just got to be aware of it, and we want to jump on these things, because if we don't, it's just going to cause more problems for you guys, and it's not fair to you guys to deal with it. We need to get our lives back. We need to get our bodies back on track, and we can go do the things we want to do, find the success we want to have. A lot of people don't realize how much these traumatic experiences are holding them back in their lives, because we want to grit through it. We want to be strong. We want to white knuckle through it and say, I can handle it. And that's noble and that's awesome. It just doesn't fully work, and there's better ways to do it. Sometimes it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter, and let's use what actually is out there and what works, and let's do it now. Let's not push it off. It just gets harder if we push it off. So there are some common trauma responses to keep in mind that you guys may have been doing in your own life, may not even be realizing what they are. One of those is anger. Anger is not always a trauma response. Anger is typically a boundary response. But the way it becomes a trauma response is if we're trying to avoid trauma triggers, then if one of those triggers get hit, then we blow up. Then we yell and scream, we break things, we punch holes in walls. And the way to kind of get a good tell for this is if it's an extreme reaction to what's going on. And I know that's subjective, it's going to be different from person to person, but it's kind of looking back on it when it's feeling calmer and things are feeling better and asking myself, did the response I give actually make sense to what happened? It doesn't mean I shouldn't have been angry. It doesn't mean that what happened didn't suck. It's just, did the response match the level of intensity of what's happening? If it didn't, there's a chance there's a trigger there that's increasing that intensity and giving you the feeling that you need to react in a much more intense way to try and match that. So that's something to keep an eye on. Another thing is avoidance, just shutting down, avoiding issues, or maybe even just submitting to people where it's like, you win, whatever it is, I'm just going to give in because I don't want to deal with this anymore. These can be good signs that we're trying to avoid that thing. Again, checking in with ourselves. Does this make sense of what's happening, or is this a pretty intense reaction? Is it pretty emotionally fueled? If it is, there's a chance there is some trauma there. There is something that is causing that to happen. Nothing happens for no reason. Everything comes from somewhere, even if we don't know what that is. We just might need to do a little bit of looking into things to figure out what that is sometimes. So keep that in mind. Keep looking at this stuff. And if you think about our first episode we talked about with that threat system, that fight and flight system, that is the anger, that's fight. The avoidance, that's flight. And you see these other systems pop up too. They just don't happen as common. But this is the stuff we're looking for. And that's why I went over that stuff in that first one, is to give that foundation of when we get overwhelmed, these things happen. If there's a trigger, we're going to get overwhelmed a whole lot faster. So again, looking out, is there anything causing this to come up? Did something remind me of something that happened before? And is it bringing me back to that place again? And now I'm reacting to that. When we are getting triggered, typically we run to coping strategies to try and help. Hopefully it's an efficient coping strategy that maybe you've worked with somebody to develop, or maybe you found to be successful or helpful in your own life. But we often run to things that kind of create more problems. One thing that's pretty common in the PTSD population is doing high adrenaline risky behavior. The reason for this is when we're traumatized, there is a tendency to feel numb, to kind of feel nothing. We have this disassociation piece that comes in because it's trying to help our body deal with the difficult thing by not feeling things. If it goes on long enough, we're going to want to feel something. So if we do something risky, we get that adrenaline rush, and you're going to feel the adrenaline. You're going to feel that tingle. And sometimes people talk about it as feeling like they're alive again. That's a good sign there might be some trauma. It can just feel good. We can enjoy these things. I like adrenaline stuff too. Don't worry. It's not bad. It's just about what we're using it for. These things are all tools. It's just what we're using it for. Another thing that we like to cope with is often, external things like the gym or drugs or alcohol or even sex. Because these things do have a way to either slow down perception so we feel less, which is kind of our goal when we're feeling overwhelmed. We want to feel less things. The other thing it does, specifically with the gym or sex, is it can regulate the nervous system. But if we're running to these things in an impulsive way, we might do it in a way that causes problems. We might cause problems in our relationship because of who we're running to for sex, or how we're doing it. Or maybe when we're going to the gym, we end up injuring ourselves, or we overwork ourselves and cause problems where we have to take a break because we got stress fractures or something else like that. So we got to keep these things in mind. These are just different responses. And this also hits in line with something like shopping. It feels good to buy something. You get that positive little release. The thing is, you have to do it constantly to keep getting that, and that's where the problems start coming in. Is these things don't fix it. It's just a band-aid that keeps falling off, so you got to keep putting a new one on, and before you know it, it causes more problems in life. It makes life harder. We're more vulnerable. The trauma hits harder, so it kind of creates this cycle that really starts to mess with us. Another thing that comes out a lot is self-harm. And self-harm looks very different. In TV shows and movies, we see a lot of just the very classical self-harm of just like self-injury, like cutting ourselves or, hitting ourselves, these kind of things. But there's a lot of different ways to get to self-harm. One thing that comes out a lot with this is with men. Men don't tend to self-harm in the same way with these things being self-injurious behavior. They tend to put themselves in spots to be injured by situations as the self-harm. So like getting into a bar fight just cuz, and not even really fighting back or not even really trying to do much, can be an example of this. Where it's like, I just want this punishment and I'm going to go get it for myself. Sometimes it's just self-harming ourselves, or we're just hurting ourselves in some way. And this goes back to that shame idea of, if I feel like I'm the problem, I'm going to do this to myself because I deserve this punishment. And this is often how this narrative goes, is we start telling ourselves we deserve these things because we did something bad, or we feel ashamed of what happened. And that's what we got to be careful of, because, they're lies. Things happen for a reason, and we get into situations not because we just want to be there. Sometimes we just end up there based on what's happened to us. And we got to help ourselves through them. And doing the self-harm, it really doesn't help much. It just kind of, again, releases some things that feel good, which help us, but it's a short-term thing. It's not going to fix it in the long term. And that's why we want to do some of these other things to fix it. Another thing that we kind of talked about with that numbing is dissociation. Just kind of feeling like we're not in our body. We're feeling kind of floaty, kind of feeling out of it, kind of feeling not attached to things. This is our body's way of protecting us from difficult situations by saying it's not really happening. It's making it feel less real. It doesn't actually protect us. It's just kind of trying to change that narrative to protect us. The brain and body does a lot to try and protect us. But these things are going to cause other issues because it's not just about surviving the trauma, it's about living our life. Because as you can imagine, being disassociated is going to cause a lot of issues in your relationship. If you can't connect with yourself, you're not going to connect with anyone else. And they're going to be asking where you're at, where you're focusing on, where you've been. So it can cause a lot of problems in a lot of different ways. It can even impact our memory. Because again, if our brain is going through something tough, it's not going to want to remember these things. It's going to have the trigger in the background. It's going to know that in the nervous system. It's going to try and keep itself safe. But it's not going to want to sit there and try and remember all these things. And we can sometimes even black out traumatic memories completely. It doesn't happen all the time. And it's not like movies show it to you. You kind of have a feeling that certain things are there. You just may not know what they are. But this stuff can play a role too. And, I have a lot of people coming in asking me, I have a terrible memory. Maybe I need to get my brain scanned. What's wrong with me? And oftentimes I just tell them, like, let's just work on the stress and the trauma. Let's see what happens when it's gone. And I'd say probably 90%, if not more of the time, once we do the work, the memory comes right back and they're doing fine again. It's not so much that something's wrong. They just have some blocks in the way. They don't even realize they're there. There's even some connections to seizure activity. There are some clients that I have that have different seizure related situations that have connected to trauma in their life. And they have a higher likelihood of having a seizure, even if they've been fine without one for years, if a trigger comes up. And they've shown this in research. They're not all connected. Some are just, separate from this stuff completely. But this is a factor to keep in mind. And, it just kind of pushes us to this idea that this stuff can really wreck our whole body if we don't do what we got to do to take care of these things. We don't want to let it just sit and cause problems because it just causes a lot of them. And it continues to do this in different areas too, like in our relationships, jobs, and learning in general. So, there's an impact on education outcomes and the ability to take initiative or be creative because if I am going through trauma, if I do have a traumatic response, it's not going to make me want to put something out there to be vulnerable because that's scary. So we try and protect ourselves. We don't want to be creative. That's being vulnerable. That's doing something new. We don't want to take the lead because we could do it wrong. We don't want to do that. That's scary. So we try and hold it back. We try and keep ourselves protected by not putting ourselves out there. And that causes issues in our relationships. That causes issues in our jobs. That causes issues in our education. Because maybe we're not going to get the promotion we deserve because we're afraid to put ourselves out there. Maybe we're holding ourselves back and having a hard time being open in a relationship, and it causes things to kind of wither a little bit. It can cause a lot of different issues in a lot of different ways. We can have conflicts in our job that lead to issues of just getting fired, whether it's getting into fights or arguments or not handling a situation well, because there can be a lot of triggers that get hit on at work. And most of the time, we're not going to get the understanding and the accommodations we may need to deal with those things in the moment, especially if we don't know what's happening. So we got to take that initiative and start working on this stuff ourselves. We got to kind of own it. There are some research focused on just indexing trauma in different ways to kind of manage where people are at, see the levels of certain trauma versus other trauma, just whether it be, a one-time car crash where it's impacting my driving, but it's not impacting everything versus like childhood, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. That's going to impact kind of every aspect of our life, and it's going to be more of that complex trauma. So they kind of look at this stuff, and on that, if their trauma index score where they kind of created this, if you have a score of 4, you have a 64% increased chance of fewer positive adult relationships. So again, going back to that idea of being vulnerable and connecting with people and letting yourself have that connection and not be disassociated, it's a lot harder to have these, and we tend to seek out relationships that feel similar to past relationships, which may be more negative focused. So we got to be aware of this stuff. We got to keep an eye on this. It's going to kind of create a path for us to follow that's not going to lead to good things. 60% of students in our schools, through research, has been shown to be impacted by ACEs in some way. That's a huge portion of the students that are just out there in our community. So we got to keep in mind that this stuff is hitting kind of everybody in different ways. all of the time. And they may need different things. They may not be aware of this stuff, but there's a higher chance of people dealing with some sort of adverse childhood experience than not, unfortunately. That's just what the numbers are telling us right now. So we want to be aware of this stuff. We got to be aware of this stuff, whether we're teachers, whether we're working with students, children, whether we're, in relationships and we're having issues within them, because these things impact us and stick with us in ways that we don't realize it does. And we just kind of take it on as this is just part of us. It helped build us. And it did. But there are pieces of it that don't need to keep living on with us that we can leave in the past. And that's why we do the work. That's why we process these things. 60% of male veterans with PTSD also report divorce. So going through these things, having these impacts can cause issues to the point that marriages fall apart, relationships fall apart. We have falling outs with family members, maybe moms or dads or brothers and sisters, cousins and aunts, and all these kind of things. Because that trauma causes us to shut down. It causes us to feel like a shell of ourselves. We kind of run from it, we hide from it. The things that we're doing to kind of medicate it or help with it tend to push other people further away and cause some problems. So we got to deal with these things. It's making life harder for a lot of people, and it's not really fair because you guys deserve a life that feels good and feel free from these things. And just because we went through hard things doesn't mean we need to be stuck on those hard things. Another big one is sexual trauma. It has a really huge impact on relationships because you're kind of reopening that wound a little bit, trying to be vulnerable with someone in that way to get into the realm of sexuality. But a lot of people will try and shut it down or try and close down those perceptions with alcohol or other things. Sometimes they'll normalize things if they go through sexual abuse, and they'll, keep seeking out more and more sexual activities because it kind of sits in with that narrative of this is what I'm supposed to do. It kind of normalizes it. Sometimes we run from it altogether and we just are kind of asexual. I'm not going to have any sexual anything because we're trying to avoid this thing that feels very terrifying. And all these things make sense, but again, it's holding us back from living a full life. And this is one of those things that Brene Brown talks about. She has a book called Full Hearted Living, where it's that idea of just kind of putting ourselves back together so we can live life fully and not in these kind of segmented, kind of broken up ways that trauma tends to do when it comes into our life. Another piece of impact with this is, the prison system, the criminal justice system. I'm going to get deeper into myself later, but another thing is I got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice, so I have a lot of understanding about how the criminal justice system works and what's going on within it, especially the research side of things like statistics. And 62 to 87% of incarcerated individuals have experienced trauma prior to incarceration. That's a crazy high number, and it kind of brings up that question of how many people in our system are there because they went through something terrible and they've been trying to deal with it in ways that haven't worked, and it created more problems for them, and they're still dealing with it to this day. And then we get into all those conversations about the impact of felonies and what that causes in our life, in terms of just like reducing our access to certain things and our ability to get support in certain ways. And it tends to lead to some pretty high recidivism rates, and recidivism means how likely people are to get out of prison and then go back to prison. So this is something to keep an eye on as well. This stuff is pretty high, and it hits, every aspect of our civilization in a lot of different ways. Violent offenders encountered ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, at rates 4 times higher than the general population. And sometimes these questions are, that whole idea of what came first, the chicken or the egg. It's what came first. Did the violence get created first and it led to just keep happening and more trauma, or was the trauma happening that led to the violence later? There's a lot of research pointing to the idea that the trauma happens first and it leads to the violence later, but it's not set in stone yet. We don't know for sure. And everyone's different. There's always going to be somebody that falls out of the average, or what we're seeing is kind of like the median. But keeping these things in mind, that there's a lot of people that deal with hard things because they go through hard stuff and they don't deal with it, and their life gets harder constantly because of it. When we go through trauma, we kind of live in this little box because we're trying to avoid any trigger, anything that reminds us of what happened, that feels like we're going through it again, anything that feels like it could be similar to it again. And because of that, we avoid so many different things. We avoid, a situation that maybe we want to do but we're scared to do. Maybe we don't want to put ourselves in a certain spot. Maybe we get really caught up in a routine and we can't seem to break ourselves out of it because it just feels good and it feels safe. There's a lot of people out there that are living a life that is just feeling safe, but it's really them kind of suffocating themselves at the same time. And that's where you hear all of these quotes of like, people may be buried when they're like 80, but they die when they're 25. Because if we don't actually move past these things and we live in this little box and we're just getting through the day in survival mode in this little routine that we build for ourselves, we're not really living. We're kind of sleepwalking through life best we can, hoping it ends soon. Not life itself, but the pain. Because that's what this is it's a lot of pain. And we don't always know what to do, so we try and medicate it in different ways through avoidance or through substances or through certain activities, and they don't always work. Sometimes the best thing to do is just face these demons, face those monsters, and get them gone. And when we do face them, as scary as it may be, you guys can handle it and we can get them gone. It just takes time. That's the hardest part. With this pain, this is where suicidal ideation can come in. And I know suicidal thoughts is a heavy topic and we don't really talk about it that much. We talk about suicidal awareness, but we never really go deep into how often people have these thoughts. It is very common for most people to have had a suicidal thought at some point in their life. I remember the numbers at one point being at like 80%. Like it's been pretty high at certain levels, and it's not so much like we have plans and we're trying to hurt ourselves. It's just the fact of having an idea of I want to not be alive. You know, having the idea of I wish I could just sleep and never wake up, or I just wish I could turn it all off, or I just want everything to just stop. Like these kind of things. Those are more passive, really low key suicidal ideation, but it still counts. And it kind of grows into bigger things the less we take care of things. It can turn into actual thoughts and ideas. Because with suicidal ideation, what it is when we are suicidal is we're in pain and we want the pain to stop. And we don't know how to stop it. So we're just trying to shut everything down. It's kind of like rage quitting on a video game. You just get so pissed off with whatever's going on that you just shut it off and throw the controller and walk away. It's not so much that you hate the video game or the controller. You're just so frustrated in that moment because of what's happening. You just want it all to stop. It's just us doing it with our own body. And they've shown this in research too. Like at the Golden Gate Bridge, they built nets and all these kind of things to try and help people. And the reason for those is once people have tried to attempt something, almost immediately do they wish they didn't. They regret it. It's just we're caught in this mindset of like pain and we don't know what else to do, and it's so intense and it's so overwhelming that we just try and come up with some idea to turn it off. But then we realize that whole like sobering thought of like, what am I doing, or what did I just do? So with suicidal thoughts, the best thing to do is to buy time. And we can do that by getting things away from us that we could hurt ourselves with, or just getting ourselves some time so we can let these things pass. Because it won't be there forever. Pain doesn't last forever. At some point, it will go away. It may be there for a while. It may feel like it's forever, but it won't be actually forever. We just got to let it pass. We got to give it some time. There's a lot of different ways we can do that, and we'll get deeper into that stuff too. I just wanted to touch on that because that is a piece of all this stuff. For every reported type of abuse experienced in childhood, our participants' risk for PTSD increased by 47%. Each cumulative trauma also increased one's risk for making a suicide attempt by 33%. So it increases your chance of a suicide attempt every abuse you go through in childhood by a third. That can really add up, especially if we have a couple. We get to those index scores of like 4 or 5, maybe even 6. It starts to really hit us pretty hard and it can start messing with our life long term. A lot of times people talk about the idea of suicidal ideation or attempts being, selfish, and I totally understand it because it's very painful for a lot of people when they're around it. But trying to keep our perspective on the idea of what that person is going through in that moment, they're so overwhelmed with these thoughts, they can't think about anything else. They're not thinking about what everyone else thinks. If anything, they get back into that shame cycle and they think everyone else would be better off without them. It's not the truth, but we get caught up in that. And that's part of the issue with shame versus guilt. And they've shown this in research too, that with shame, there's a higher likelihood of suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts. Because if I think I made a mistake, guilt, I can work on the mistake. If I think I'm a mistake, shame, then sometimes the best or the answer our brain goes to is saying, well, let me get me gone. And that's where we get to the isolation, but that's also when we can get to suicidal ideation of let me just be gone then. It can be terrible, and there's a lot of things we can do to deal with it. And if you are feeling suicidal, reach out and get help. It's not a bad thing, and it happens a whole lot more than you think. No one talks about it. The cool thing with what I do is I get to hear about everything that happens behind the scenes for people. So I hear about the struggles. And in all honesty, most people deal with the same things. We just don't talk to each other about it, and we think we're the only ones going through it. That's why it's best to just open up. Some of the best things we can hear in times of struggle are the words, me too. I've been there. I've had that. I dealt with that. I felt that. We just need to open up to get that. We got to be vulnerable, and that's the thing that trauma tells us not to do. So again, we got to face it. We got to embrace it. We got to let ourselves get what we need to get out of these things. There's a lot of different ways to treat it. If you guys want to get into this stuff, that's awesome, and you guys should. And they have shown a lot of benefit of doing these things. It's just finding the right fit for you guys. So there's a lot of different therapies that can do this. With a therapy, you want to do it with a therapist. You can try and do these things on your own, but it can get pretty intense, and it might be kind of hard, and it might be nice to have somebody with the experience of doing it before that can walk you through it. That's really what a therapist is there to do, is kind of guide you to wherever you want to go, whether it's working through trauma or working through something else. And if a therapist isn't a good fit, that's not a bad thing. There's going to be bad ones out there. There's going to be ones that don't fit with our style. I've had clients tell me that, my style doesn't work for them, and that's totally fine because we don't work with everybody. But we got to find the right person that works for us. And if you're realizing it's not working for you, you got to go get what works. So please go out and get this and try it out, see how it goes. And if it doesn't feel right, just try someone new. And I know it sucks trying to try things out and find a right fit, but once you find that right fit, you are set for a long, long time. And it will give you back your life. It's worth giving a shot. We just got to give ourselves that chance. So there's various treatments we can use. CBT has a lot of things focused on this. Cognitive behavioral therapy, that's CBT. It's a lot of changing thoughts and challenging ideas, and there is some processes in there focused specifically on trauma, which can be really great. We got DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. That's building up skills, giving us different strategies to manage these things when they're there. So it can help us process certain things, but it also gives us some things that we can use to just help deal with this stuff. But we're going to talk about distress tolerance in the future, which is a DBT idea, to help us deal with difficult things as they're happening, such as feelings from a traumatic event that's popping up or a trigger, that kind of stuff, and just kind of processing through some things. We got EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Desensitization is desensitizing from trauma, reprocessing, changing how we're looking at it. EMDR gets into the nervous system to try and release this stuff, get it out so it's not stuck in there, it's not as active. That's one of the techniques I really like to use because I've seen it really effective very quickly. People talk about EMDR as a chainsaw. It works really fast and you get a lot of work done, but if you do it the wrong way and you're not careful, you can get some people hurt. You can re-traumatize people. So we want to do it the right way. We want to find what works for us. Sometimes it works best to dive in super deep to the deep end and do all the hard stuff first and just see where it goes. Sometimes we got to really gradually get there. That goes back to knowing you and knowing what works for you and trying out certain things. And if it doesn't feel good, don't run from it. Let the person know and adjust and see if it works. And again, if it's not a good fit, then get a different fit. That's okay. That's not a bad thing. Sometimes we got to try multiple shoes on. We don't have to just find the first one and that's it. We got somatic therapies, which is focusing on the feelings the body has and the emotions and all these kind of connections and working through that. When we go through trauma and it's not processed, we can get a lot of these feelings coming back into our body. So you can feel like you're going through these things again. If anyone out there's been into a car crash, you may, after that car crash, when you were driving, had that feeling of like getting into a car crash again. Some of the sensations that you felt kind of felt like they were reliving themselves, coming back out. That's normal. They get stuck in the body. So somatic approaches kind of focus on trying to get those processed and figuring those out. We also have NET, which is narrative exposure therapy. This helps out by talking through traumas in almost like this third-person narrative. They expose us to these things so it's easier to talk about and it's not so overwhelming. This is important because there is some traumas that are too intense that overwhelm us too much to try and get into. So this is a way to get around that and try and get some of these things out without it overwhelming us as much. We also have some approaches that are bottom-up approaches or top-down. Okay, CBT is a top-down approach. A bottom-up approach would be more of like those somatic therapies. Okay, so top-down is using literally what it seems like from the body, top-down, using the brain first and then getting to the body, getting to all those things. Bottom-up is using the body first and then getting to the brain later and changing up the thoughts and the ideas around that later. So there's a lot of different things on both sides of that. That's kind of just a general idea. It's not one way works better than the other way. It goes back to us individually of what works for us. Sometimes focusing on the thoughts is all we need and we're good. Sometimes we got to focus on the body first because those sensations and feelings are so overwhelming that we can't even get to those thoughts yet. We got to get those sensations taken care of first. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing you can do is imagery rehearsal therapy, IRT. Kind of going in to the idea of like the flashbacks and different things that come into mind and how we deal with certain triggers. So there's a lot of that stuff too. That's kind of a top-down approach. So you can look into that. You got exposure therapy, which is kind of exposing you to these things over and over again, using different skills to kind of calm yourself in that moment, show yourself you can handle it. It can be pretty helpful. It doesn't always feel really good, so sometimes we got to take our time with it. And they've even shown this stuff with like psychedelic medicines too. They've shown with PTSD that it's been really helpful with reducing symptoms and managing these things kind of faster. I know it's not legal in a lot of places, so that's kind of the next step a lot of states are trying to take to build out more treatment. So hopefully in the future, more things open up with that stuff where we can kind of use more of these things and see what really works and how we can use it. It's just a brand new part of the field, but that is a piece to keep in mind. And also keep in mind, this does not mean go out and do psychedelics on your own trying to deal with your trauma. That is a recipe for a bad trip. Let yourself do what you need to do with support. If we get hijacked by our nervous system during these things and you're trying to do it on your own, it's going to be intense. We may need somebody there to help cool it down, at least at first, so we get our footing, so we know where we're at, and then we can start doing it more on our own. But be careful trying to do these things all by yourself. It's not because you can't, it's just a little more risky, it's a little more unstable. And if you do it in the wrong way and kind of go through something traumatic, like you bring up a lot of feelings, it's super intense and it overwhelms you, I mean, it's going to make it really hard to get back to doing this work later too. So just keep that in mind. Try and let yourself be open to just, working with somebody and seeing how it goes. And if you're not sure how to do that, let me know. I'm here to help with that stuff too. I can let you guys know what you could do for yourself or where to go from this stuff. And I'll let you guys know of some things that we can do from there too. Because there are some stuff we can do. We just got to work through the trauma part, the processing piece with somebody, because that's going to be the hardest part. When we are working through trauma, there are some things we can do. One of those things is grounding techniques. Grounding techniques help us when we do have that disassociation, we have that overwhelming feeling, we have that piece kind of pulling us back to the past, feeling like we're going through it again. So a grounding technique could be like the 5 senses, 5 things you see, look around, look at 5 different things, talk about them. 4 things that you can feel, touching 4 different things. 3 different things you hear. So listening around, seeing what you hear, 3 different things. 2 things that you can smell, smelling 2 different things just to get those smells back. And then 1 thing you can taste, kind of going through those 5 senses and just really bringing us back to this present moment. That's why mindfulness is so important. Is in the present, we're not getting as overwhelmed because we're not stuck in that past. When we get stuck in the past, that's when we get overwhelmed. That's when things start building up on us. We want to bring ourselves back to the present. We want to ground ourselves here. That could just be taking our shoes off and standing outside, sitting on the ground. Because when we have shoes on, we have that little cushion between our feet and the ground that kind of feels like we're floating a little bit. So letting our feet actually be on the ground can ground us and feel in that moment a little bit more. And not to mention the earth has a little bit of an electrical charge that kind of gives us this calming feeling. So just standing outside, being barefoot can feel good, just kind of feel like we're reconnecting a little bit with that present moment, just kind of pulling back from anything that's building up on us. Another thing I like to build up with clients is a feel-good list, especially before we get into any of this stuff. It's just a list of things that make us feel good. It could be skills, strategies. It could be a certain friend we like to talk to. It could be, a song we like to listen to, a movie we like to watch, whatever it is. Anything that makes you feel good. Because if you're diving into any of these things or you have a trigger that comes up, sometimes we got to make us feel better. It can be intense to just be stuck in this stuff and not knowing where to go. So having a list of things to look at, especially if that brain shuts down, cutting back to that first episode again, we want to have something to focus on, to look at, and just get to work. So if you have something in your phone or like written down, you can just look at it and be like, all right, I'm going to do that thing. It's going to help out. And while you're doing this, keep adding to it. The things that really work, put stars next to it, focus on those things because we want to hold on to those. Some things are going to work better than other, but we just want to keep ourselves feeling good. Another thing is we got to lean on supports. Our superpower as humans is not that we're really strong or really fast or we can jump really high. It's that we work together. We're good at working with other people. That's our superpower. Trying to do things alone, trying to do things by ourselves doesn't work out. We like the idea of doing it because we don't like leaning on people and having that fear that they could let us down. And I get it, especially if there's trauma related to that. But it's not going to help us. And sometimes we got to find the right people to lean on and let them show us, let them prove it to us that listening or leaning and having someone listen to what we need can be exactly what we need and it can work out. We just need those positive experiences. We got to show that to ourselves. Another thing with trauma work is it takes time. Patience is important with this. It's not going to be super quick. We're going to get into some stuff that talk about how it can show some improvements pretty quickly. We're not going to get it all gone very quickly. It's going to take time, especially if stuff has been there for a while. So don't rush it. Take your time with these things. And routines can help. If we have habits and routines that feel safe and they can build us up, that's good. We just want to find balance in that where we have the routines to lean on, but we're also pushing ourselves a little bit to get out there and try and build up that vulnerability and that ability to just kind of take emotional risk. Creative expression can be great. It can help us release things that we don't really know is there, that maybe we don't even know how to verbalize. So that could be painting, that could be drawing, that could be journaling, that could be, writing, whatever you want to do. It's just kind of putting things out in a creative way. It gives us an outlet. It gives us a release. We can't hold it all in. We bottle it up. It blows up. It causes more problems. With trauma, it's kind of like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can keep trying and keep doing it, but at some point it's going to pop up somewhere. And at some point you're going to get tired and you're not going to want to hold it down anymore. So we want to get that beach ball gone. We don't want to have to hold it underwater all the time and pretend it's not there. We just want to get it gone. Self-compassion and acceptance can really help too. Just kind of accepting yourself and giving yourself some love and care can really build us up. Sometimes that's exactly what we need. A safe space or home base decompress is important too. If everywhere in your life just feels stressful and overwhelming, we need somewhere where you can just kind of decompress. This is kind of the idea of that calm place. Even if we can't create it in our own life, sometimes we just got to create it in our own mind, and we just got to go sit somewhere quiet. You just sit in a closet, go sit in your car, whatever it is, and just let yourself focus on being there and let things calm down, let things relax a little bit. We need to be able to turn things off and decompress. We can't be on edge all of the time. It just burns us out. It grinds us down. It doesn't really work. At the end of the day, with a lot of this stuff, we're trying to override the negative experiences that we went through with positive experiences. So with something like physical touch, maybe we had some physical abuse or some sexual abuse in the past, so we're really not good with physical touch. So we want to build up lots of positive experiences with physical touch, hugging a loved one, cuddling with somebody that we enjoy, shaking someone's hand that feels safe, like these kind of things. Just kind of building up the inventory in our mind of experiences that have gone well. Because if all the experiences have always gone negatively, our brain's going to look out for it a whole lot more. Like this is just a bad thing. But if we get to overwhelm or override some of these with some more positive experiences, well, now the brain might be a little more of maybe this is good, it could go bad, but let's see what happens. And if we keep doing that, we keep building it up, maybe we get more into that optimistic side of like, there's a good chance this is probably going to go good. And if it goes bad, I'll protect myself and keep myself safe. But most of the time, it's going to go good. So we want to try and really build up these positive experiences. That can be hard because sometimes we got to do the exact thing we're scared of the most. But we want to try our best to just build these things up and feel good about what we're doing. So it's going to help in the long run. While we're doing these things, we also want to make sure we have some skills. There's a lot of different ways to get some skills, but we want to have some things we can use to calm things down and help us feel better. We're going to go through some of those with the DBT stuff. We're going to go through some other ones outside of that too. But that's just something to keep in mind for you guys. And if you find something that works, add it to your list and keep on building on that list. There are going to be a lot of things that can help. It's just finding out what works best for you. So we want to work through this stuff because it works. Part of what we're doing is we're trying to go from victim to survivor. We don't want to just be stuck in that victim of what happened and how it impacted us and what it did to us. We want to move to survivor where we can live our life and own these things. And we can do great things because of what happened and not just have these things tear us down. These things can build us up. I know that sounds weird, especially if we haven't dealt with some of the traumas. It feels just like it's tearing us down. But you can transform it. You can reprocess it to the point that it builds you up and it doesn't break you down. Part of that's owning our past. Part of it is accepting it and not denying its existence. Sometimes we want to pretend it never happened. And our body knows it happened. You can't fake it that much. You can't turn it off. It happened. Past is written in stone. We can't change it. We gotta face it. We gotta accept it. Acceptance reduces intensity. It's gonna make things easier. So we just gotta let ourselves accept and face these things when they happen. Out of people that participate in regular, customized, or tailored trauma therapy, so customized to what they need, unique to their experience, that's why it's most important to get these things in a really one-on-one kind of setting. And that again is, you know, the the main thing that we offer at Premier Performance is that one-on-one, unique, tailored training or therapy, because that can help us work through these things. But with people that do that, they have found 77% to 100% have had a reduction in symptoms just from doing the work. So it's a pretty high chance that it's going to work. It's just taking the time and doing the work consistently. Okay? Main word in there is regular. You can't just show up once or twice, talk about it, and it's done. We got to stick with it and do these things. 46% show improvement with regular therapy within 6 weeks. So you're going to see an impact. People have seen an impact regularly within 6 weeks. And that's about half of the people that have dealt with this stuff. So there are some that take a little more time. A good number for seeing some improvement from therapy is about 12 weeks of regular therapy. That's when we really start to see things changing. But patience is key. It's going to take time to get through these things. It's going to take time to work through this stuff. It's not bad. It just takes time. And there will be benefits. There will be relief along the way. It's just not going to take care of everything all at once. It's not a quick fix, and there is no quick fix for it. We got to take our time, do the work, and we will get to the other side. This gives us control of our life back. This is why we need to do it. Is right now we're chained to these things that have happened to us. We're chained to what we've been through, and we're stuck on it. And it's causing us to live life in these little tiny boxes. So we got to break those chains. We got to spread those wings. We got to let ourselves go live our life, and you're going to be so grateful to yourself that you did it. Hard now, easy later. Do the work, face the hard thing, and you're going to be glad you did it. You just have to do it. We have done a lot of research into the financial impact of trauma on our society. And there was a study that came out in 2018 that estimated the cost of PTSD to be, for 1 year, just for 2018 alone, to be $232.2 billion. That is insanely high. And that's in so many different ways. Lost wages, lost jobs, lost opportunities, things being broken, issues being caused, being housed in the criminal justice system, all of these different things adding up. If we can really start working on this stuff as a society, getting this trauma under control, because we know what to do with it, we know how to manage it, we just got to help ourselves to do it. We can have a much better society. We can have life living better for everybody. And it impacts life and society in so many different ways we're not even aware of. We just got to face this stuff. The more we ignore or avoid something, the more we confirm to ourselves we can't handle it. So we got to stop telling ourselves that this is too big, it's too much, we can't do it. We got to start getting ourselves to face these things and embrace it and show ourselves who we can really be, finding that true self, optimizing that potential, really reaching those highest of levels, reaching that peak. There's a lot of ways we can do it, and I'm going to help however I can. But the only way to get there is by you guys reflecting where you're at, realizing what we need, and then getting to it. At the end of the day, recognition is the first step. It forever will be the first step with anything we talk about. If you don't know something's happening, we can't do anything about it. You guys got to look at yourself, realize where you're at, look at the people in your life, see where they're at, see where you see these things play out, see where you're seeing issues, and just kind of get to work on some of these things, or at least acknowledge that work needs to be done, even if you don't know what to do. And that's where I can come in. Send me messages. Let me know where you're at, where you're feeling stuck. And if you don't know where to go from there, I can let you know. I can give you some insight. I want to help out however I can. So let us know. That's our goal here at Premier Performance, to just create that premier mindset, do the best we can to just live our life in a just really effective way and not be held back by things that we have answers to, the things that we can fix. We are going to get more into distress tolerance in the future. I'm planning to do that around like episode 6 or so. So we'll get into that stuff. And those are things to help us deal with things that just suck. Because sometimes there's no fix, it just sucks. So those are going to really help us. Tip that we talked about in that first episode is one of those distress tolerance skills. That's one of my favorites. So if you do want to get started on that stuff now, focus on some of those things from that first episode, focus on the self-care from the second episode, and keep this stuff in mind as we move forward and try and just explore the idea a little bit for yourself. If you have anybody in your life where you see these things and you're not sure if they see it, try and send that episode to them. See what they think. See if they are willing to open up to these things and kind of reflect on it a little bit differently by thinking about maybe some of the responses or hearing how some of these things actually plays out. Because they might get some benefit from this stuff. Share the episodes, put them out there to people. If there's anyone that you think could get something from this stuff, give it to them. Because that's the goal of doing this stuff. It's not to pump me up. It's to help everyone out there get what they need. But the only way for them to get it is to see it. So if you have somebody that you think could get something from this, send it their way. See what they think. Even if it's just a clip of it or a certain part of it. See if they get anything from it. If these questions come up, any issues or problems, you guys let me know. You can email me, tmailer@premierperformancereno.com. Anything you got, send it my way. I got the Instagram, premier_performance_Reno. The Facebook and the LinkedIn page, Premier Performance LLC, on both of those. And again, you can text or call me, 775-561-0056. If you guys have something, let me know. I want to help out however I can. I want to answer the questions. I want to give you guys the insight. You guys just got to let me know what those questions are, what I can help with. Send them my way. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of being vulnerable. And if we need to hide a little bit behind that anonymity, then do that. Send it anonymously. I don't mind. I just want to get you guys what you need. And I can just talk about these things on the episode if we need to. So throw them my way. We'll see what we can do. There are some other resources to continue this knowledge search with. I talked about Brene Brown. She's great. Dr. Garber Mate is great in a lot of things too. There's also a book that you can get into called The Body Keeps the Score. This is a book written by a doctor focusing on the impacts of trauma. That's been probably the most used book by therapists that I've seen on trauma. So there's a lot of good stuff in there, and they talk about a lot of things I talked about today. It's kind of heavy at times, so give yourself time if you want to go through it. Take your time with it, but there are some really great insights in there too. We're going to keep moving with all these things. Next week, we're going to jump into anxiety, what that looks like, how it impacts us, how to kind of manage some things, and what to do about it as it does impact our lives. Here at the Premier Mindset, we're trying to just give you guys everything you need to set that mindset up to reach the highest levels of success in your life. I want to see you all be great. I want to see the success stories. I want to see things work out. I want to see things get better. So don't be afraid to put these things into work. Don't be afraid to let me know what I could do to help you move forward. And if you guys want any of the one-on-one work, let me know, and we can try and set something up. I'd love to get into the work together, and we can get into these things a little more in depth with exactly what you're looking for. If I can help in groups, we can do that too. We have a lot of things that we offer. But again, this is just about spreading the awareness of this and helping some people overcome those demons so we can get our life back. Go out there, keep this stuff in mind. Don't get stuck on it all the time. Rumination doesn't help. But don't forget to do the work too. Don't avoid it. And if I can help at all, say the word. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great week. I'm excited to keep doing the work together. And I will see you all next week as we keep on moving ahead and keep on building up these things that we're building together now. Have a great one. I'll see you guys soon. Be the best you can be.